The sun was already climbing high in the late summer sky when Mira and her father arrived at the entrance to the tribal lands. The dust kicked up around the tires of their old truck as it rolled to a stop. From the window, Myra could see the familiar decorations strung across trees, bright ribbons, beadwork, hand-woven flags that fluttered in the dry breeze. It was the time of the annual summer gathering, a weekend of sacred importance to her people, a time of drums, dance, stories, and reconnecting with both ancestors and kin. Myra, just 12, stepped out of the truck with quiet excitement. She loved this time of year. Even though they lived off the reservation in a nearby town, her father made sure they returned for every major gathering. It was where she felt rooted, surrounded by something deeper than ordinary life. The air was full of smoke from morning sage burns, and in the distance, the first rhythm of ceremonial drums could already be heard, slow, steady, like a heartbeat. They began the long walk from the parking area toward the central grounds. It was a bit of a distance, especially in the heat. Myra didn't complain, she'd been raised not to. Her sneakers crunched over the gravel path, and she admired the beadwork on the regalia of those walking ahead. Her father carried a small basket with their offerings, tobacco, cloth, and cornmeal for the elders. Then she noticed him just up ahead. Near a bend in the path, a man was walking slowly, too slowly. He looked to be in his 70s or 80s, long white hair tied back, his frame thin but upright. He wore traditional garments, but what stood out most were his bare feet, cracked, bruised, coated in dust. Each step he took seemed to cost him effort. He winced slightly, but made no sound, no plea for help. He walked with quiet dignity, his eyes fixed forward. Something stirred in Mira. She tugged her father's sleeve and pointed. "Dad, that man, he doesn't have shoes." Her father followed her gaze, his brow furrowed, but he said nothing. Perhaps like many adults, he assumed the elder had chosen to walk barefoot as part of a vow or tradition. But Myra saw pain, not purpose, in his steps. She looked down at her own shoes, scuffed but sturdy, already warm from the sun. She was quiet for a few moments, then without another word, knelt down and began untying her laces. "Myra," her father asked gently, "what are you doing?" "I'm giving him my shoes," she said plainly. "He needs them more." Her father hesitated, but then gave a slight nod. He knew better than to stop her when her heart had already decided. Shoes in hand. Mira walked up the gravel path toward the elder. Her steps were careful, respectful. When she reached him, she didn't speak at first. She simply knelt, placed the shoes at his feet, and looked up with a soft smile. The elder stopped, surprised. For a moment, their eyes met hers, young and full of concern, his old and full of weariness. Then something passed between them, silent but strong, a kind of recognition. He looked down at the shoes, then at her again. "You give these he asked, his voice dry but warm. "Yes," Myra said. "Please take them." The elder bent slowly, placing a hand on her head in blessing. He muttered something in Lakota, his voice thick with emotion. Then he slipped the shoes onto his feet, adjusting the laces slowly. They didn't fit perfectly, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had noticed. Someone had cared. As the elder continued his walk, still slow, but less painful now, Mira returned to her father barefoot, brushing small stones from the soles of her feet. She didn't flinch. She didn't expect praise. It was just something that needed to be done. Her father placed a hand gently on her shoulder, pride in his eyes. "You did good," he whispered. They kept walking, side by side, toward the heart of the gathering. Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple gesture, just a girl offering her shoes, was about to awaken something powerful in the hearts of everyone present. The elder stood still for a moment, his long, weathered hands hovering over the sneakers Mira had placed gently in front of him. His feet, darkened by sun and age, bore the marks of a long life spent close to the earth. The cuts and told stories of decades, harvests, ceremonies, marches, grief. Myra didn't know all that, but she could feel it in the way he moved, how every step was an effort not to show pain. "You give these?" he asked again, his voice quiet, as though he needed to be sure. "Yes," Myra replied, with a soft smile. "They're yours now." There was no hesitation in her tone. No doubt, she had done what felt right in her bones. For her, this wasn't a grand act, or something to be noticed. It was simply a response, a natural one to seeing someone in need. The shoes were old, sure, a little snug, but they still had strength in them, and they could carry this elder farther than bare feet ever could on gravel and sand. The elder bowed his head. Slowly, with aching care, he lowered himself to the ground. His joints popped softly as he settled, brushing off the soles of his feet before sliding them into the shoes. They didn't fit perfectly. Myra was a growing girl, and he had wide, well-traveled feet, but he adjusted the laces with practiced fingers, tying a knot in a way that seemed almost ceremonial. He looked at her again, this time with more than surprise. There was reverence in his eyes. His hand reached out, rough and trembling, and he placed it gently on the crown of her head. He began to speak in Lakota softly, steadily, a blessing from the old tongue. Mira couldn't understand the words, but she didn't need to. She felt them settle into her skin, like warmth from the sun. people began to notice. Not everyone, just a few. An elder woman resting nearby under a cottonwood tree, two boys who had paused with water jugs in their arms. They watched quietly as this girl, barefoot and solemn, stood beside the elder like a sentry of compassion. There was no ceremony, no crowd, no spotlight, just an exchange that pulsed with deep, ancestral energy, something far older than applause. The elder stood again, this time a little steadier. With the shoes now cushioning his feet, he took his first step forward, and this time, there was no wince. His stride was slow, but no longer painful. He gave Myra a small nod, full of gratitude and pride, before continuing on toward the circle of trees where the opening prayers would soon begin. Myra turned and walked back to her father, her feet bare now on the hot gravel. Each stone pricked, each patch of dry dirt clung stubbornly to her skin, but she didn't flinch. Her face was calm, her hands hung loosely at her sides. Her father looked at her in quiet amazement. "You sure about that?" he asked gently, his voice low, so only she could hear. She nodded. He needed them more. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached into the offering basket and handed her a small towel. She used it to brush some of the dust from her feet before folding it up and tucking it beneath her arm. She didn't ask for new shoes. She didn't ask for anything. They kept walking. The drums in the distance getting louder now, and as they moved past the first fire pit, Myra's bare footprints left a faint trail across the soft earth that would, before the day ended, become symbols of something far greater than a child's generosity. They would become the first steps of a story the whole tribe would carry. Myra had no idea that something small, something she didn't even think twice about, was already beginning to ripple through the gathering like a stone dropped into still water. While she and her father quietly made their way toward the center of the grounds, barefoot and humble, others had noticed. Not many at first, just a few. Yet in tribal communities, especially during sacred gatherings, stories travel fast, especially when they speak to the spirit of something deeper than the moment. Near the food tent, where fry bread sizzled in cast iron skillets and pots of corn stew bubbled gently, an elder named Auntie Lila leaned in close to a cousin and asked, "Did you see the girl?" Her tone wasn't gossipy, it was reverent, full of something that sounded like awe. The cousin nodded slowly. "Gave her shoes away to Vicasa," she whispered, as though even speaking it too loudly might diminish its power. By the craft tables, where women beaded and braided under shady cottonwoods, the murmurs began to take shape. "That little girl, she gave her shoes to the old man with no sandals. I think he was one of the old firekeepers. No, he's the elder who used to walk from Dakota country to pray on the ridge every year." The story bent and shifted in details as it spreads. All oral stories do, but its core remained the same. A young girl had seen a struggling elder and responded without hesitation, without being asked, without waiting for someone else to step in. It wasn't just about generosity. It was about spirit. It was about the way she had done it, with humility, with grace, with nothing asked in return. In many Native cultures, such actions are not merely appreciated. They're seen as echoes of ancestral teachings. To honor your elders, to give without expecting, to watch quietly and respond with heart. What Myra had done reminded people of a time when that was the way everyone lived. A time when the measure of someone's strength was not in how loud they could be, but how quietly they could care. Around the outer circle, some of the youth teenagers, often too caught up in their phones or self-conscious about their image, started asking, "Who's the girl? Is she from Red Rock Band? What tribe is she with?" No one seemed to know for sure. She was just there, barefoot, helping fold blankets with her aunt near the elder's tent. Not looking for attention, not even aware she had created it. One of the tribal councilwomen, Clara Spotted Elk, heard the story while arranging tobacco offerings at the ceremonial site. She paused and asked one of the men tending the sacred fire, "You see it happen?" He nodded slowly, his face unreadable. She didn't wait for permission. Just gave him her shoes like it was nothing. Clara placed the last of the offerings on the altar and turned to glance toward the girl, watching her for a long moment. "She walks like she's already been taught the old ways," she said quietly. Myra, meanwhile, continued going about her afternoon, helping her relatives. She brought water to her cousins, helped unpack a blanket bundle for an auntie who had trouble bending down, and joined in a small dance with the other children when the first drum circle began. Her bare feet kicked up dust as she moved, but, still, she didn't complain. She didn't know people were watching, but they were. A grandmother, watching her from the edge of a folding chair, whispered to a man beside her, "She carries the spirit light. You can see it in the way she moves. That girl is going to bring something back to this tribe." And so, as the sun continued its slow arc across the sky and the drumming grew louder, the whispers thickened. The girl who had given up her shoes had somehow given something far more meaningful to the people around her, a reminder, a reflection, a soft, clear echo of what it meant to live with respect, humility, and heart. By nightfall, Mira's name would not be known by everyone, but her story already was, and it had only just begun. As the sky turned to gold and shadows lengthened beneath the cottonwoods, the elder whose feet now rested inside Myra's worn sneakers reached the fire circle. The sacred fire had already been lit, crackling gently as it consumed cedar and sweetgrass. Smoke curled upward, carrying prayers skyward, connecting this world to the spirit world. The elder stepped into the semicircle of elders seated around the flame, and though no words were spoken at first, several of the other old ones shifted when they saw him. Not because he was late, or because his stride was slower than before, because he was wearing shoes that were clearly not his. Vikasa Red Elk was not just any elder. Years ago, he had been one of the firekeepers, a quiet yet central figure in the tribe's spiritual life. He was known not for long speeches or dramatic gestures, but for his steady hands, deep prayer, and the stories he shared in small circles late at night. His voice barely louder than the wind. Age had slowed him down. Arthritis gnawed at his knees, his eyesight dimmed. Still, each summer he came to the gatherings, walking slowly from his modest home on the edge of the valley. He never asked for help, never expected anything, but now, for the first time in many years, Vikasa's name was on people's lips again. The head firekeeper, an elder woman named Willow, hollow voice, leaned toward him as he took his seat beside her. Her sharp eyes immediately caught the scuffed sneakers on his feet. "Those are not yours," she said softly, not accusingly, but curiously. "No," Vikasa replied, his voice raspy but clear. "They belong to a girl." Willow raised her eyebrows. "A girl gave you her shoes." "She did not give," he corrected gently. "She offered. There's a difference." Willow was quiet for a moment. In her many years, she had seen people give for the sake of being sign gifts given loudly, with strings attached. But what Vikasa was describing was different. A silent offering, no ceremony, no reward, just a girl, barefoot now, somewhere among the crowd. "Tell me what happened," she said, and so he did. He told her how he had been walking the path, barely able to place one foot in front of the other, how the heat had seared his soles, how the sharp stones had sliced into the thick skin he'd built up over the years. He had been determined to walk anyway. Not for pride, but because it was sacred ground, because every step toward the circle was a prayer. He had been ready to endure it. But then she appeared. She did not speak loudly, did not hesitate. She just knelt, like someone who understood, he said, and she looked at me not with pity, but with recognition, as if she saw more than just an old man with bare feet. She saw, me. Willow hollow voice, sat back and let the words settle in the air like ash from the fire. Her gaze traveled out beyond the circle, where families gathered under tents, where children played by the edge of the stream. Somewhere out there, this girl was walking barefoot on earth. That was, in this moment. Beginning to feel holier than before, Vikasa reached into his pouch and pulled out a small piece of cloth blue, patterned with tiny stars. "I had this in my pocket when she stopped me," he said. "Didn't know why I brought it, but now I do." Willow nodded slowly. "You'll return it to her. I'll offer it," he said, with a small smile. "There's a difference." And just like that, the story began to move through the elder circle, not through loud proclamations, but through nods, through passing glances, through subtle gestures passed hand to hand like firelight in the dark. Vikasa's quiet telling made its way into the hearts of those who had sat through many ceremonies, heard many stories, but knew that every so often, something rare happened, something worth remembering. As dusk settled fully over the land, the smell of sage, cedar, and cornmeal filled the air. Ceremonial fires lit the periphery of the gathering grounds, casting flickering shadows of dancers, drummers, and children who had now grown tired from a day of celebration. Myra sat on a folded blanket beside her father near the edge of the main lodge circle. Her feet, dusty and scratched, were tucked beneath her legs, but her face glowed with quiet contentment. She hadn't asked for anything in return, not shoes, not praise, not even a thank you. And still, she felt full in a way she couldn't quite explain. Her father, who had been watching her silently for most of the evening, finally spoke. "You okay?" he asked, nudging her gently with his elbow. She nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" She shrugged, then looked up at the stars starting to wink awake in the indigo sky. "About how he walked better. Like after I gave them to him, it felt like something important happened." Her father studied her expression for a moment. "It did," he said simply. Across the gathering space, several elders rose from their seats and began a slow, deliberate procession toward the sacred fire. Among them was Vikasa Red Elk, his posture more upright than it had been earlier, the sneakers holding his weight like they were always meant for his feet. He walked with quiet dignity, each step purposeful. The circle grew quiet, sensing something was about to shift. Myra didn't notice at first. Her eyes were on the dancers, the glowing firelight, and the rhythm of the hand drums that echoed like a heartbeat across the land. But then someone tapped her father's shoulder. It was Clara Spotted Elk, the tribal councilwoman. She bent down, low, and whispered, "Bring your daughter. The elders have called for her." Myra's heart skipped. "Am I in trouble?" she whispered. Her father smiled. "I don't think so." She stood up, brushing off the blanket fuzz from her shorts. Suddenly, aware of her bare feet against the cooling ground, the rocks that had earlier stung now felt different, less painful, almost grounding. She walked with care as they crossed toward the center, people partying gently to make way. A few adults nodded at her as she passed, some smiling softly, others simply placing a hand over their heart. The elders were seated in a half-circle around the fire. Vikasa stood just in front of them, facing Myra as she and her father approached. The fire cast a warm, golden light on his deeply lined face. Now, soft with emotion, he held something in his hands, small folded, wrapped in cloth. Myra stepped forward without being prompted. Something inside her told her this moment wasn't about rules or formality, it was about respect. And listening, and being present, Vikasa began to speak, his voice firm, though not loud. "Today, this young one reminded us who we are," he said, looking not just at her, but at the entire circle. "She gave something with no expectation, and because of that, she gave us all something more." A soft murmur of agreement passed through the elders. Willow's hollow voice nodded deeply. Her eyes locked on Mira's. "She showed us that the teachings are alive." Another elder added, "that they still live in the hearts of our children." Vikasa then extended the wrapped bundle toward Mira. She hesitated before reaching for it, uncertain. "For me?" she asked. "For you," he said, "not as a reward, as recognition." She took it gently, unwrapping the cloth with small fingers. Inside was a pair of finely beaded moccasins, soft leather, decorated in shades of blue and white, stars and waves stitched with care. They were clearly handmade, and they were perfect for her feet. "They belonged to my granddaughter," Vikasa said. "She walked strong in them. Now you will too." Myra's eyes widened, her lips parted in awe. She looked to her father, who gave her the slightest nod, and then back at Vikasa. "Thank you," she whispered. Vikasa bowed his head. "You reminded me how to walk again. We honor that." The fire crackled between them, and for a moment, everything else faded. The crowd, the drums, the food, the chatter. It was just the warmth of the fire, the cool of the earth beneath her, and a sacred exchange between generations, barefoot no longer, but never empty. As Myra gently slipped the moccasins onto her feet, the gathering around the fire began to stir with reverence. The gift had been given, but it wasn't just about shoes anymore. Something deeper was unfolding. The elders exchanged glances, and a few whispered in Lakota, words Myra didn't understand but felt the weight of. Even the wind seemed to hush, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Clara Spotted Elk stepped forward. Standing near Mira, her voice, steady and warm, rose into the air like incense smoke. "We gather each year to remember," she said. "To honor our stories, our survival, our ways. But tonight, we remember something else, something many of us forgot. The power of quiet kindness." She turned to Myra. This young one didn't wait for permission to do good. She listened with her heart and acted from a place our ancestors would recognize. Myra shifted slightly, unsure what to do with the attention. The moccasins felt soft and grounding, like they'd been shaped for her spirit as much as for her feet. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and she stood a little taller, letting the warmth of the moment settle into her chest. Then came the moment no one expected. Willow's hollow voice rose from her seat, holding a long strip of dyed fabric deep red with symbols painted in black and white. It was one of the old ceremonial ribbons, once used in rites of passage, long set aside as modern events became more structured, more scripted. But tonight, something unscripted had happened. She looked at Myra with solemn eyes. Once, when a young person acted with courage and selflessness, they were honored by the circle, not for fame, not for pride, but because their spirit had reminded the people of something sacred. "We see that spirit in you." Myra stepped forward again, this time on her own. The circle widened, giving space. Willow raised the ribbon and gently placed it across Mira's shoulders, letting it fall like a sash across her chest. "Tonight, we remember the ceremony of the silent gift," Willow said, "a tradition not written down, but carried in the hearts of our grandmothers and their grandmothers before them. You have walked in their steps." A quiet chant began, not loud or rehearsed, but low and ancient. One elder started, then another joined, and soon the sound grew into a gentle song that wrapped itself around the fire like a prayer. Drums picked up in rhythm, slow and steady. The beat matched the pace of a heartbeat, of walking feet, of the rhythm of the land. Myra stood in the center of it all, unsure if she should move or speak, but she didn't have to. Her stillness said enough. Round her, the people weren't clapping or shouting, they were witnessing. Their silence was full of honor. In that moment, time felt like it bent. It was as if the ancestors had drawn near, curious and approving. The stars above seemed brighter, the fire warmer, the songs older than any voice could remember. The gift Myra had given, simple, unnoticed by most at first, had become something that connected generations. A reminder that ceremony was not always made of smoke and feathers and chants. Sometimes, it was made of soft steps and quiet offerings, and the barefoot walk of a child who simply chose kindness. Her Her father leaned in and whispered, "You made them remember." "Remember what?" she asked softly. "That we're still us." He said, "That no matter how far we think we've gone, our ways are right here waiting, in a small act, a single step." Myra didn't answer. She didn't need to. She looked down at her feet, now wrapped in moccasins that had walked before her, and realized something. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of one. A new one rooted in the old ways, carried forward by a new voice, and it had begun, with nothing more than a girl, a pair of shoes, and the instinct to care. In the days that followed the gathering, the story of Myra's gift rippled through the valley, like water moving across still pond. It was first told around kitchen tables and coffee pots, then around schoolyard benches and church steps. What began as a private gesture between a girl and an old man became something much larger because people needed it to be. In a world tired of headlines and noise, Myra's quiet act reminded everyone what dignity looked like, what true strength could be, and what happened when one heart opened to another without fear or demand. Children at school began walking barefoot, on purpose during recess, saying they wanted to feel what she felt. A teacher in the local elementary school asked her class to write essays on moments of kindness they'd witnessed or given. One student, previously quiet and often left out, shared how he had given his only sandwich to a classmate without lunch the week before. "I didn't think it mattered until now," he wrote. Myra's name wasn't even mentioned, but the wave she had started was clearly moving outward. Elders who had grown distant from the younger generation began visiting youth circles again. Vicasa, Red Elk, now walking a little steadier in his own moccasins, started leading storytelling nights, not because he was asked, but because he felt called. He spoke softly but with purpose. "It took a girl's gift to show me I still had something to give," he said to a circle of teenagers one night. "You all do. You just haven't been asked in the right way yet." Myra herself didn't say much about what had happened. She returned to her regular routine, feeding the chickens before school, helping her dad at the coupon weekends, attending language classes at the cultural center. But something in her had shifted. People greeted her with new eyes, not with awe or celebrity, but with respect. The kind of respect usually reserved for someone older, someone who had earned it over time. She noticed people listening when she spoke, and she used her words more carefully. One day, her father handed her a folded newspaper from the nearby town. There, on the front page, was a photo of her and Vicasa standing by the fire, the ceremonial ribbon still draped across her chest. The headline read, "Barefoot Kindness Rekindles Tribal Pride." She frowned. "I didn't do it to be in the paper." "I know," her father replied. "That's why it matters." At the next tribal council meeting, one of the elders brought up a proposal. "What if we bring back the silent offering ceremony?" she asked. "Not as a performance, not every year, but only when the moment calls for it. When someone does something the old way, without needing to be seen." There was a pause, then slow, steady nods. "We almost forgot how to see those moments," another elder said. "This reminded us," and so, the tradition was renewed not by formal vote or decree, but by collective will, a sacred practice. Long quiet, stirred awake again, the tribe began to notice small kindnesses differently. An uncle who fixed someone's fence without being asked. A grandmother who left food at a neighbor's door when she heard they were struggling. A boy who defended a younger child from bullies without seeking praise. These were the new ceremonies, the quiet ones, the sacred ones. Myra didn't know the full reach of what she had done. She never would. That's the way of true offerings, their seeds planted with no demand for fruit. But she could feel the shift. She could feel it in how people walked together more closely at community events, in how the language classes filled up faster, in how the songs at the gatherings grew louder and more certain. And always, she remembered the elder's words, "You reminded me how to walk again." She hadn't meant to teach, she hadn't meant to lead. But maybe leadership, in its truest form, wasn't about taking charge. Maybe it was about being first to kneel, first to notice, first to give, even when no one was watching, and Myra had done just that. Seasons changed, and the story of Myra's barefoot kindness lived on, not just as a moment to remember, but as a way to walk forward. Time, as always, moved ahead, bringing with it new challenges, new voices, and new needs. But in the heart of the community, something remained still and strong, a quiet, unshakable belief that small acts could shift the world. By spring, the tribal school had adopted a new practice. Each month, one student was honored, not for grades or sports, but for compassion, real, everyday compassion. They called it the Barefoot Award. It came with no medal or certificate, just a simple leather cord, knotted and passed from one student to the next. Myra was the first to wear it, and when she passed it on to another child who had stood up for someone being bullied, she smiled and said, "You carried someone, now you carry this." Tourists who visited the tribal lands during the summer powwows often heard whispers of the story, the girl who gave her shoes, the elder who walked again, the fire that glowed a little brighter that night. Some even asked to meet Myra. She'd wave politely, but preferred to stay with the other dancers, her new moccasins quiet against the ground. "It's not my story alone," she would say. It belongs to all of us now. At home, Myra kept the ceremonial sash and the newspaper clipping in a small cedar box her father carved for her. On days she doubted herself, or when the world felt too heavy, she'd lift the lid and gently run her fingers across the beadwork of the moccasins and the folded words from the paper. They reminded her that strength wasn't always loud, that sometimes it was the choice to act when no one else did. The Casa Red Elk continued to walk, not just physically, but emotionally. He became more present in the community, offering teachings not from a pedestal but from a place of humility. That girl taught me more in 10 seconds than I've learned in years, he once said during a youth circle, not with her words, but with her walk. He began mentoring younger men, encouraging them to live not as warriors in battle, but as protectors of peace and dignity. And across the community, a change could be felt. Not dramatic, not flashy, but real. The kind of change that builds slowly, in the bones. People paused more often to ask how others were doing. They brought extra food to potlucks. They spoke their language more proudly. They greeted elders with new respect, as if seeing them again for the first time. It was said that every generation forgets something in. Every generation must also remember something new. Myra's gift, simple as it had been, reminded her people of both truths. They had forgotten how much meaning lives in a small act, but they had remembered because of her how powerful those acts could be when done in love. Years later, when Myra was asked to speak to a gathering of tribal youth, she stood quietly for a long time before she spoke. She looked at the children, seated before her, some with bare feet, others fidgeting in sneakers and boots, and she said, "I didn't give my shoes because I was brave. I gave them because I saw someone hurting and didn't know what else to do. That's it. That's the whole story." She paused, then added, "But the part I didn't understand then, and maybe still don't fully, is that sometimes when you give something away, you end up with more than you had before. Not in your hands, but in your heart." The room fell silent. A small child whispered, "Did he ever give the shoes back?" Myra smiled. "He didn't need to. He gave me something else instead, and that was the truth." In the end, it wasn't about the shoes. It never had been. It was about what they carried, not just across the elders' sore feet, but across time, tradition, and generations. They carried kindness. They carried honor. And most of all, they carried home.